You know that hiss of traffic on wet asphalt?
Oh, yeah.
Like when you're walking near a busy street in the rain, most of the time you probably classify that as noise. Just, sonic clutter.
Right. Something you actively try to block out.
Yeah.
You put in your headphones specifically to escape it. It's basically the acoustic equivalent of trash on the sidewalk.
Exactly. But what if that exact same sonic clutter wasn't something to ignore? What if it was actually the raw material for a completely new emotional language?
Which sounds crazy, I know.
It does. But welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm here with our resident music tech expert. Today, we are unpacking how a group of young producers took the literal trash of city noise and turned it into an entirely new genre.
Yeah, this is a super fascinating topic. Hello, everyone.
We're going to be exploring the evolution of post-dubstep and experimental bass. And we're using this really incredible historical column from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR. It's from December 2025.
It is a deeply technical read, but so rewarding.
Oh, for sure. Our mission today is to see how these producers took the rain, the commutes, the late-night ambiance of London, and created an auditory experience that just completely changed electronic music forever.
It really was a massive shift.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how they shattered the rules, we really have to go back to the baseline. Like, we have to start in South London in the early 2000s.
Right, places like Croydon and Brixton.
Yeah.
Because to understand the part of post-dubstep, you have to understand the original environment. The early 2000s dubstep scene was anchored by these legendary parties, like DMZ.
And we aren't talking about a casual night out here.
Oh, no, not at all. This was an intensely physical, overwhelming musical experience. It was built around these huge speaker stacks that were just pushing pure physical weight.
Right, we're talking about 140 beats per minute, just incredibly dark atmospheres, packed rooms.
Sweaty basements, basically.
Yeah. And driven by this aggressive sub-bass that you literally felt rattling your ribs way more than you actually heard it with your ears.
Exactly. That tempo and that aggression, that was the absolute law of the land back then. But then right around that 2006 to 2009 window, the paradigm shifted.
And the column goes into how a new generation of producers stepped in, artists like Mount Kimbie, Burial, and eventually James Blake.
Right. They basically started pulling the architecture of the genre apart.
Which is such a cool way to put it. They began expanding the boundaries by bleeding in like R&B, ambient music, and these unconventional, really art-leaning beat structures.
And crucially, they slowed everything down.
Yes.
They completely shattered that rigid 140 BPM standard. They opened the music up to this much wider, sort of lethargic 110 to 130 BPM range.
I was actually trying to visualize this shift while I was reading through the source material, and it feels like a very literal physical journey to me.
How so?
Well, early dubstep, that 140 BPM era, it's like being inside that dark, sweaty, high-intensity basement club we just talked about. It's loud, it's claustrophobic in the best way, and the energy is just bouncing off the walls.
Oh, totally.
But post-dubstep, that is the feeling of leaving that club at 3:30 a.m. You push open those heavy metal doors, you step out into the foggy, rainy London streets, and suddenly all that frantic energy is just gone.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Instead, you just hear the distant bass from the club vibrating through the wet pavement beneath your feet. It's echoing off the brick alleys. It's isolating, but like incredibly beautiful.
And what's fascinating here is that physical journey isn't just a metaphor. Like, these producers literally use the echoes of the city to build their tracks.
Wait, literally?
Literally. They dragged the environment outside the club right into their hard drives. They used urban noise, late night traffic, and these lo-fi mobile phone recordings as their foundational sample materials.
Wow.
Yeah, they made the city itself the instrument, and it created this introspective emotionality that traditional aggressive bass music simply didn't possess.
That is wild. And the column goes deeply into the acoustic mechanics of this, and I definitely want to spend some time here.
We have to. It's the core of the sound.
Because they didn't just, record rain sounds and call it a day. They re-engineered the literal physics of the bass.
They really did.
So how did they actually achieve this feeling of isolation through the low-end frequencies?
Well, the foundation of this entire genre is the sub-bass. Specifically sitting down in that extremely low 40 to 60 hertz range.
Yep.
At that frequency, you aren't really hearing a note so much as you are feeling a massive amount of air being pushed around the room.
Right, the rib rattling stuff.
Exactly. But traditional dance music at the time relied heavily on low-frequency oscillators.
LFOs, right?
Yeah, LFOs. They used them to create very rhythmic, aggressive wobbles in the bass. Post-dubstep rejected that completely.
So what did they use instead?
They opted for sine waves, which are mathematically the purest, smoothest type of sound wave.
Smooth, meaning no harsh edges.
Right, there are no sharp sonic edges to a sine wave. And then they manipulated the volume envelopes, specifically by suppressing the attack.
Okay, suppressing the attack meaning what exactly for the listener?
Think of the attack of a sound like a car accelerating. A punchy dance beat goes from 0 to 60 in a millisecond. It hits you instantly in the chest.
Right.
Suppressing the attack is like taking your foot entirely off the gas and just letting the car slowly, silently roll into the room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the sound doesn't punch you, it swells. It rolls in softly. It creates this highly restrained atmospheric feeling. The bass is looming in the shadows rather than, attacking you head on.
I love that. Looming in the shadows. But wait, if you're layering all these field recordings of traffic and rain and city ambiance on top of a looming bass, how do you stop all that low-end rumble from the street noise from turning the track into complete mud?
That is the big technical hurdle, right? They solved it by enforcing a strict spatial setup.
How does that work?
They kept this heavy rolling sub-bass strictly in mono. So it sits dead center in your speakers or right in the middle of your head if you're wearing headphones.
Okay.
Then they applied a high-pass filter, which is an audio tool that literally slices off the low frequencies.
Like a sonic knife.
Exactly. They applied that high-pass filter to almost everything else in the track. All the street noise, the rain, the vocals, they scoop the low-end rumble right out of them.
So the bass has its own dedicated lane.
Yes. The bass has the entire bottom of the track to itself, staying crystal clear. And the wide stereo field, the far left and right of your headphones, is completely reserved for the environmental sounds.
That makes so much sense. The bass grounds you in the center and the city surrounds you on the periphery.
Exactly.
I am having a really hard time picturing how this works in a genre born from dance clubs, though.
It's definitely a leap.
Because if the tempo is fluctuating and the bass is just softly rolling into the room, and the column explicitly notes this, these tracks avoid clear, explosive drops.
Right, no big beat drops.
So how does this even function as beat music? Where is the rhythm actually coming from if everything is so ghostly?
Well, the rhythm isn't driving you forward anymore. It's stumbling alongside you.
Stumbling. I need an example of what that actually sounds like, because stumbling does not sound like something anyone wants to dance to.
Huh, fair enough. It's a complete mutation of the traditional UK garage two-step rhythm.
Okay.
In a normal dance track, the producer uses punchy drum machines and heavily emphasizes the offbeat. That's the groove that makes your body want to move.
Right, the classic dance feel.
But post-dubstep producers actively avoided that. They used incredibly weak snare sounds.
Weak on purpose.
Yes, on purpose.
Yeah.
And they completely threw out traditional drum kits for their high-end percussion.
No hi-hats.
No metallic hi-hats. Instead, they took field recordings like the rustling of a paper bag, the sound of a key dropping on a wooden table, or even a letter flicking.
Oh, wow.
And they processed them to function as the beat. So the rhythm is literally constructed from the debris of everyday life.
The debris of everyday life? That's incredible.
It incorporates broken beats that intentionally feel slightly unstable, slightly out of sync.
And that brings us to how they painted with this noise. The column refers to post-dubstep fundamentally as a, quote, space-making genre.
Which is very accurate.
Right. And they use two specific sound design techniques that are basically audio magic tricks to create that space: convolution reverb and granular synthesis.
Two very heavy hitters in sound design.
So standard reverb is basically just a generic digital echo, right? It just makes things sound like they are in a bigger room.
Yeah, it's pretty synthetic. But convolution reverb is vastly different. It uses an actual digital footprint, which is called an impulse response of a real physical space.
How do they even get that footprint?
Audio engineers will literally go into a specific cathedral or an abandoned concrete underpass and pop a balloon or fire a starter pistol.
Wait, really? Just a pop?
Just a pop. And they record exactly how those sound waves bounce off the specific architecture of that room.
That is so cool.
So then producers can take that acoustic blueprint and apply it to their snare drum. They aren't just adding echo. They're mathematically placing their drums inside a real London tube station.
Which is incredible on its own, but then granular synthesis takes it to a whole other level.
Oh yeah, granular's wild.
Because rather than just playing a sample of a rainstorm from start to finish, granular synthesis chops that audio file up into microscopic grains.
Really tiny grains.
We are talking about slicing the audio into pieces that are between 10 and 70 milliseconds long.
It's almost imperceptible.
A fraction of a second.
Yeah.
And they take these microscopic slivers of rain, stretch them, loop them over each other, and turn a simple recording of water hitting concrete into a thick, foggy, playable synthesizer texture.
It literally transforms a linear sound into a cloud of sound.
It's a cloud, yeah.
And because they are building these tracks out of literal audio clouds, they had to organize them meticulously.
Right.
The column gives this great breakdown. Think of the frequency spectrum of a post-dubstep track as an apartment building.
Okay, I like this. Let's walk through it.
Down in the basement, from 20 to 60 hertz, you have that pure sine wave bass. It is the physical foundation shaking the floorboards.
Got it. Then you move up to the ground floor, which is the 200 to 800 hertz range.
Right.
This is where the field recordings, the noise, and the vocal fragments live. And I noted from the source that producers would specifically use an equalizer to artificially boost the 300 to 800 hertz band.
Yeah, do you know why?
The source said it enhances that mid-range urban feel. Like it literally makes the track sound more like a city street.
Exactly. Then moving up to the upper floors in the 1 to 3 kilohertz range, you find the chirps and that processed debris-like percussion we talked about.
The paper rustling, the keys dropping.
Yep. And finally, on the roof, the 8 to 12 kilohertz range.
The air.
The air, the microparticulate noise, the crackle of a vinyl record, or the hiss of a cassette tape.
So every single element has its own distinct vertical altitude in that building.
It's incredibly structured.
But the secret to this architecture isn't just where they put the sounds, is it?
No, it's what isn't there.
The gaps.
Yes.
That's something I want you, the listener, to really pay attention to the next time you put on a track from this era. Because they stripped away the driving, repetitive drum loops of early dubstep, the producers had to find a completely new way to create tension.
And they did it through silence.
Exactly. The sudden gaps in the noise dictate the emotional structure of the song just as much as the actual notes do. It's an exercise in holding back. Sounds just organically appear and disappear out of the fog.
Which brings us to the two architects who really define this sense of isolation.
We have to talk about them.
We do. If we were talking about sounds appearing and disappearing into the fog, Burial is the absolute center of this movement.
Oh, without a doubt.
His 2006 debut album on the Hyperdub label just fundamentally changed the trajectory of electronic music.
Burial's sound is like the ultimate extraction of urban loneliness.
It really is.
The sound design details described in the column make his music sound like a haunted house in a metropolis. His kick drums don't sound like drum machines. They sound like distant night thunder rolling across the skyline.
And his snare drums.
They sound like broken wood splinters snapping in half in an alleyway. It's so visceral.
He was revolutionary in how he manipulated human emotion through mundane samples.
Like what?
Well, he would take an automated train announcement from a subway platform, stretch it, blur it with that granular synthesis we talked about, and turn it into a sweeping, melancholic synthesizer pad.
That is just brilliant.
But his vocal processing is where the tree haunting happens.
I was going to ask about this. How did he make the vocals sound so, ghostly? Because I know he pitched them around, but usually when you pitch a vocal down, it just sounds like a giant, right?
Right.
And when you pitch it up, it sounds like a chipmunk. But Burial's vocals don't sound like either of those things.
That's because of how he manipulated formants.
Formants, explain that.
Formants are essentially the acoustic fingerprints of human vocal cords. They tell our brains the size and shape of the person speaking.
Okay, so it's the physical characteristic of the voice.
Exactly. Burial figured out how to detach the pitch of the note from that acoustic fingerprint.
Wait, you can do that?
Yeah. He would take a tiny fragment of an R&B vocal, scramble the pitch, but shift the formants completely independently.
Wow.
By separating the two, he created voices that bypassed our normal auditory processing. The resulting vocals sound entirely genderless and ageless.
They sound like ghosts.
Exactly. They sound like ghosts.
And he also added very short reverse reverbs to those vocals.
Oh, that's a great detail.
Yeah, the column mentions that before the ghostly voice even speaks a word, you hear the echo of the voice rushing backward to meet it.
It gives every vocal line this incredibly phantom-like presence.
It's like a memory trying to speak to you.
Wow, yeah.
So Burial pushed the sound of the cold outdoor city to its absolute limit. There was nowhere further to go out there in the rain. So in 2010, the genre naturally had to retreat indoors.
And that brings us to the next evolution, the arrival of James Blake.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because James Blake took the foggy, isolated streets of Burial and basically locked the door.
He did.
He brought the genre into a quiet, introspective bedroom.
Blake took all these hyper-experimental post-dubstep sound design techniques and fused them with traditional singer-songwriter structures.
Which was a massive pivot.
Huge pivot. Suddenly, instead of train announcements, you have classical chord progressions.
Right.
You have a massive focus on the acoustic piano and his own very intimately recorded vocals. It was a shift toward extreme minimalism.
But he was still applying the rules of post-dubstep, just in a completely new environment.
Exactly.
For example, the column breaks down his use of audio compression. And compression, for those who might not know, is basically an automatic volume knob. Whenever a sound gets too loud, the knob instantly turns the volume down. But the second the audio gets quiet, the knob cranks the volume all the way up, magnifying all those microscopic sounds.
And Blake used this in a very specific way.
He did. He compressed his vocal recording so heavily that the actual sound of him taking a breath between lyrics was magnified until it was as loud as the piano chords.
His breathing in his lungs essentially functioned as the rhythm track.
Which is crazy.
It creates a sense of intimacy that almost feels invasive, you know?
Yeah, like he's right next to your ear.
And he applied that same philosophy to instruments.
Yeah.
He pushed the mechanical noise of the piano right to the forefront.
So you aren't just hearing the musical notes vibrating on the strings.
No, you're hearing the wooden pedal squeaking and clunking beneath his foot.
I love that. And he also stripped out the heavy kick drums entirely, replacing them with tiny low-end clicks.
Right.
And he changed the basement of our apartment building, didn't he?
He did. While early tracks sat aggressively down at 40 to 60 hertz, Blake smoothed out his bass and moved it slightly higher, centering around 50 to 70 hertz.
So it's a bit warmer.
Yeah, it's a warmer, more melodic type of sub-bass. It doesn't rattle your ribs, it wraps around you, supporting those classical vocal harmonies while really blurring the lines between organic acoustic sounds and electronic processing.
Both Burial and James Blake, despite sounding very different on the surface, share a core radical philosophy.
They do.
In traditional music production, the hiss of the microphone, the crackle of a vinyl record, the squeak of a piano pedal, the sound of a breath, those are all mistakes.
Right, you hire an expensive audio engineer to clean them up and erase them so the track is pristine.
But for these artists, those imperfections are the music. The background noise is elevated to the lead instrument.
And because they prove that background noise carries profound emotional weight, this philosophy inevitably bled out into the wider musical ecosystem.
The timeline in the MMR column tracks this expansion beautifully, actually.
It really does. Around 2011, you start seeing these specific post-dubstep techniques heavily influencing mainstream art pop and R&B.
Right, artists realized they didn't need explosive drops to create tension anymore.
Exactly. And then by 2015, this atmospheric approach spreads to North America, evolving and officially getting labeled as experimental bass.
And then by 2020, it morphs again, heavily integrating with ASMR culture and these hyper-detailed lo-fi acoustic sounds.
Which brings us to where the genre sits today.
Right. The bass line isn't the lead actor driving the melody anymore, is it?
Not at all. In modern experimental bass, the low frequencies have become purely a spatial structural element.
The structure.
Yeah, the bass is just the ground you walk on while listening to the track. The boundary between rhythm and melody is totally obliterated.
So traditional song structure is just gone?
Basically, yeah. You don't get a verse, a chorus, a build-up, and a massive drop.
Yeah.
A song is now just an environment that you inhabit for 3 or 4 minutes, where sounds drift in and out of the fog, pulling from contemporary classical, R&B, and ambient music, all glued together by those ASMR-level microsounds.
So what does this all mean for us? Looking back at this evolution, it becomes really clear that post-dubstep and experimental bass aren't just niche subgenres of underground club music.
Definitely not.
They represent a total update on how human beings use low frequencies, spatial audio, and the discarded remnants of urban life to express profound, often melancholy human emotion.
It's powerful stuff.
These producers proved that the city isn't just a place where music happens. The city is the music.
And that leaves us with an important question, something for you to carry with you after you take your headphones off today.
I love this part.
If these visionary producers could take the mundane, gray, often irritating sounds of a rainy London commute, the garbled train announcements, the slap of a ticket gate, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt,
Right.
and transform them into breathtaking, emotional art.
What hidden musicality exists in the unintentional noise of your own daily life right now? That is such a good question.
What would the post-dubstep remix of your morning commute sound like if you simply changed how you listen to it?
Something to think about the next time you step outside. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. See you next time.